To session 8 of Quakerism 101, and thank you so much for being here. Trying to figure out the best way to do the intros. On my screen, people are in one order. It doesn't mean they're on the same order on everybody else's screen. So I'll just go left to right on my screen and ask everybody. I'm Chuck Huff, a convinced Quaker of 9 years, and I've done more Quaker growing in the last year than in the previous 8. So if that's any pattern, there's a lot of stuff still for me to do. Chuck Hedges, you're in the upper left there. Could you be next, please?
Okay, yes, I'm Chuck Hedges, and I've been with Goose Creek, oh my goodness, I think about 14 years or so. And before that, I was a lifelong Episcopalian. And so it's great to be with such a wonderful group as this.
Thank you. Debbie, you're the next one. Thank you.
I've been a Quaker for the last 10 years. Mr. Patrick down in the corner is the culprit that got me into this. He was my Sunday school teacher at a United Church of Christ and introduced me to Phil Gully. So that started me on my path.
Thank you. Patricia?
I'm Patricia Barber. I've been at Goose Creek for 28 years and still growing, still learning. Got very checkered spiritual history before that, but still on the path of exploration and growth, I hope.
Thank you. Susan?
I'm Susan French. I grew up in Yardley, Pennsylvania in a Quaker family. My father was a birthright friend. And I've been a member of a Friends meeting pretty much my entire life, from the age of 12, I guess. Wow. My father died and didn't want to sign up his children. He thought it was a personal decision. And so he died when my brother and I were 11 and 12, and we soon thereafter chose to join Yardley Friends meeting. And I'm now a member of Goose Creek.
Awesome. John?
Yeah, I'm Sean Lloyd. I've been attending Goose Creek for almost 5 years now. And finally, after much procrastination, submitted my membership letter. So going through that process at the moment. Yeah, and I've really been enjoying, I guess, this last year of doing tons of reading and research to do lessons and discussions with the older kids in first day of school. And I've really enjoyed the classes here that I've been able to attend. So yeah, happy to be here again tonight.
Anne?
I'm Anne Travell, and I was an attender at Goose Creek meeting for 20 some years, and I'm now a member of that meeting.
Sheila?
I'm Sheila Christen. I've been a member at Goose Creek for over 40 years, and there's still a lot of mysteries in the universe for me.
Nancy and Mac?
Okay, I'll start out here. We've been members of Goose Creek meeting for about 4 years. Now we moved here from Arizona. I've been attending and a member of Quaker meetings since about 1965. I haven't calculated how many years that is, but we've really enjoyed the Friends. And in particular, we've really enjoyed the Goose Creek meeting. What a great bunch of people.
I'd like to add that we started attending Quaker meeting in the Cambridge meeting when we met the graduate student there. But we didn't join for 10 years. We just, we were 22, 23 years old and didn't know if that's what we'd be forever. And so we finally did, because we didn't go anywhere else, and that looked like where we were going to be forever. So
Simon?
You're on mute. You're on mute, dear.
Yeah, you're on mute.
I am a lapsed Episcopalian who is the spouse of Patricia.
Thank you. Frankie.
You're on mute,
Yeah.
Frankie.
I'm Jolene Curry. My husband's name is Frankie. I don't know
Oh,
why
okay.
on my screen is being Frankie. I'm a Quaker. I haven't become a member yet of our meeting in Louisville, Kentucky. But we're a Hicksite Friends meeting, and I'm just trying to figure it all out. I'm glad to be here, learning, getting more and more involved. I work with the First Aid program quite a bit, and I'm on the Ministry and Worship Committee in our meeting, and I'm just having a great time of it. Really, I'm enjoying it very much. I'm just, especially this Hicksite thing, I'm trying to figure out if that's where I belong or not, for sure. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you. Patrick. Still mute. There we go. Can't hear. Not sure what's happening, but
He's muted. Yeah, you got to unmute.
Does he know how to
There we
turn it
go.
on?
all right, try now. Yes,
We're
yes.
hearing you. It's just real light.
You might have to turn your volume up, Patrick.
I could hear you for a minute and now I can't.
Yeah.
All right. It's something.
Patrick, do you have a place on your computer where you can turn the volume of your computer up so we can hear you?
I don't think he's off mute yet.
No,
No, I can see he's off of mute. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
And I did hear about 3 words, but it's not gonna be able to debug it right now. Can you hear us okay? Okay. I'm gonna hold off on anything trying to debug that. Jim. Sorry.
he's going to be
I can't hear you.
when I click on my mute button to mute or unmute, it tells me all the people that are on mute, and James and the other gentleman you were just talking to, the ones that can't be heard,
Yeah.
according to mine, they're muted.
Oh. Huh. Let's see if I can figure out. I've got 15 participants.
Mhm.
I've got the mic is active on mine. Let me go down here. Ann is muted. Catherine's muted. Chuck Hedges is muted.
Debbie's muted. Sean's muted.
Oh. No, I don't see.
One thing they can do is at the mute button, there's a little arrow. If you click on that, you can see settings to increase your audio on
Right.
Zoom.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, down in my screen, it's the bottom left corner. There's a caret that points up on the right-hand side.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a little slow to get this technology. I'm a little behind times, I guess. My name's Patrick Turner. I'm from Southern Indiana. I've been intrigued by Quakerism for some time. I've done some reading and slowly getting into it more and more all the time. Enjoy it a lot.
Right. Thank you. Jim, can we hear you now? No?
Can you hear me?
We can't
Yes.
hear Jim.
Okay, I'm gonna mute mine.
All right. I don't know what's happening with the Jim. We normally talk on Wednesdays, it's fine. Not hearing you. I'll think about that. We're gonna,
Yeah, we need to move along here a little bit. And we've
Yeah.
got Catherine
All
and Joel.
Catherine, please.
Hi, I'm Catherine Cox. I have been a convinced friend for, I don't know, 30, 35 years, and I have been at Goose Creek for most of that time.
Thank you. Joel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Joel Suggs, and my wife and I live in Cincinnati. And our daughter Ellie met with y'all a lot of Sunday mornings from April through August of this year. And occasionally on Sunday morning, I would join Mr. Huff and a few other people online here on the Zoom way to go. So we're in Cincinnati, so we're glad to join y'all. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here.
Okay.
Yeah, I got it. Go ahead.
I'm sorry about that.
No worries.
Retired Methodist, and I'm auditing the program.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to share the screen. I think we've done all the introduction. I'll just do a very brief, see what I can do here without causing.
Experience of God.
Okay. So we did the Quaker Speak video, and Patricia will be sharing first our inward experience of God transforms us and leads us into outward expressions of faithful living, witness, and action. And then Susan and Chuck will be guest speakers. And this, I think everybody's familiar with, but I'll keep an eye on the screen. If you're not being recognized, just wave at the screen, or if you're familiar with the raise your hand icon in Zoom, that'll put you up at the top left, so I'll know you're there. And this is the 8th core value, which I actually just read, so I'm not going to be redundant. We'll try to hold our questions until Patricia does her sharing and our 2 guest speakers talk.
Okay.
Thank
Over
you.
to me. Yeah. All right. People think it's some hold on, there we go. Why am I not getting this thing has come up with a, oh, I see what I've done. All right, hang on a sec, guys. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay. Can you see this? I have a feeling that.
See what?
No, I see what I've done. All right, sorry.
No worries.
No, I see what I've done. Sorry. It's just that the thing with the sharing is you have to make sure you have the right thing up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. It's fiddling with the technology takes the time to Okay, so when I was thinking about what to say about tonight's core belief, I thought of this wonderful Quaker and that fabulous Quaker, and I mean, you could come up with any number of friends who have taken, who have lived lives of faithful witness. And one of the things I think that drew me to Quakerism was having had a lifetime at that point of going to churches where there was a lot of talk about doctrine and about dogma and how we should believe and what we should be doing, and but then there'd be somehow a gap between Sunday and the rest of people's lives. Now, of course, that's not always the case, but it frequently seemed to me that that was the problem, is that what I was seeing happening in church didn't seem to be being lived out in people's lives. And one of the things that really attracted me to Quakers is that very little on the surface seemed to be happening on a Sunday, but a whole lot was happening the rest of the time. There's a wonderful story, I'm sure it's completely apocryphal, about a visitor who's sitting next to an old friend on the bench one morning in Quaker meeting, and he's waiting for the service to begin. He's waiting for something to happen. He's waiting for something to happen. And so he nudges the friend next to him and he says, "When does the services begin?" And the friend said, "When we leave the meeting house." And that has been really the story of Quakerism. It is, to me, a lived practice. And I thought I would just spend a little bit of time talking today about John Woolman. We hear a lot about John Woolman, and there's a really good reason why we do. Because I think he is the archetype of a Quaker whose inward experience of God transformed him and led him into outward expression of faithful living and action. And his influence, he was a modest man, a humble man, but his influence absolutely has gone all the way down from his time on the mid-18th century to today. He is still held up as an example of Christian living, spiritual action, and in his own quiet way, great effectiveness, even though it was not a kind of overnight success that he experienced or that he brought about. So, I mean, I thought I'd start with a quote here with somebody who wasn't even a Quaker, and that is the poet Coleridge. "I should almost despair of that man who could peruse the life of John Woolman without an amelioration of heart." And that was very soon after Woolman's journal was first published. I'm not going to go through his life because, you know, that's just one thing after another, but I just thought we do very quickly go through kind of the high points of his life. And he was born in 1720. When he was born, Quaker slavery in amongst Quakers was common in North America and in Barbados. And so he grew up in what was West Jersey, then is now Jersey, in a place where there was a lot of Quakers who owned humans. He moved as a young man to Mount Holly, New Jersey, to work for a shopkeeper, and was called to the public ministry when he was still only 21 years old. He then became a traveling minister, which meant he was recorded as a traveling minister, and continued this throughout his life. And he used that traveling ministry to essentially speak to friends about the inconsistency in owning humans with their Quaker faith. He also was very much in terms of he was a peace activist, and that he was during the war of the French and Indian War, he refused to pay war taxes. He was very concerned about the lot of indentured servants and the poor. But all of this was of a whole with him. His life was a life of complete integrity. And it all began with the inward spiritual life that he led, that then was expressed in his outward actions. In 1758, after a lot of effort, Philadelphia Yearly Meeting began to, they adopted a formal minute urging Quakers to free enslaved people and excluded all those buying or selling slaves from meeting business. 1763, he visited the Indians, Native Americans in Wyalusing, Pennsylvania. He was very concerned about the increased violence on the frontier between settlers and Indians, and he wanted to understand their point of view. 1772, he was led to travel to England, where he died of smallpox. Unfortunately, just 4 years after his death, Philadelphia Yearly Meeting finally made slaveholding a discernible offense, some 30 years after he really began to speak out against it. So what I really want to talk about, though, with John Woolman is what was it about John Woolman and his inward life and his spiritual journey that led to his action and the way in which he engaged with the world. So he talks about in his journal, and absolutely, if there's anybody out there who has not read the journal of John Woolman, immediately, as soon as this is over, go to Amazon or go to your secondhand bookstore and buy a copy and start to read it. Because it is, to me, the one essential book of Quakerism is the journal of John Woolman. As a young man, he was obviously a very spiritually sensitive child, but it took him a while, like most people, to really get serious about his Quaker faith. And he talks about how I was early convinced in my mind that true religion consisted, I can't see the whole of my screen, consisted in an inward life, wherein the heart doth love and reverence God the Creator, and learn to exercise true justice and goodness, not only toward all men, but also toward the brute creatures, that as the mind was moved on an inward principle to love God as an invisible, incomprehensible being, on the same principle it was moved to love him in all his manifestations in the visible world. So John Woolman saw no division between love of God and love of humanity. It was a kind of, say, integral belief that he had, that you cannot love and reverence God unless you love all of God's creation. And he was a kind of proto-environmentalist, along with being a great humanitarian. The interesting thing about John Woolman, too, is that he was not, as we would imagine a activist today, who had, he was a strategist working for specific goals. What he was a faithful witness to the revealed truth of God. With the inner life of the spirit, Woolman harmoniously combined the outer life of action. And he did nothing without turning inward and going through a very, very intense period of discernment, which he then took to his Quaker meeting and his Quaker brethren to test it in community before he set forth on any action. Unlike Benjamin Lay, who preceded him by about 20 or 30 years, he was not a disruptor. Benjamin Lay is enjoying quite a bit of a resurgence of interest and admiration, but Benjamin Lay was very confrontational. I can't remember whether I mentioned last time one of the stunts that got him expelled from, disowned by friends, was going to, I think it was Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, with a bag of pokeberry juice secreted in a Bible, and he plunged a dagger into it and squirted red pokeberry juice all over the people around him to make his point, and he was promptly disowned. So there can be a conversation as to whether Benjamin Lay was very effective, although at the same time, I do think probably disruptors are needed as well as the people willing to work within the system. He became, early on, as I say, 20, he began to feel the pull towards public ministry. And he had the same kind of stumbling moments and errors that I think anybody who is led into public ministry has, where you say too much, or you stand on your hind legs, and you realize after you've spoken that in fact possibly it wasn't you, it was your ego. And he recounts in his diary this sort of funny, but for him, obviously very distressing experience where exactly that happened. And he realized immediately that he had in the phrase that people sometimes use today, outrun his guide. But he spoke about it in the terms of the time. As I was humbled and disciplined under the cross, my understanding became more strengthened to distinguish the language of the pure spirit inwardly moves upon the heart, and taught me to wait in silence, sometimes many weeks together, until I felt that rise which prepares the creature to stand like a trumpet through which the Lord speaks to his flock. And that was a lesson that he really carried through in all of his traveling ministry and in all of his involvement with yearly meetings, Philadelphia yearly meeting, New England yearly meeting, Baltimore yearly meeting. He traveled to all of those with his message and his testimony as to what God was inspiring him to do. As I say, he became a traveling minister very young. He was only 23, which meant that he really had the imprimatur of his meeting to go out and to take his message beyond just his meeting. But, it was all a learning experience. So he talks about how in traveling ministry, traditionally and to this day, those that are still involved in traveling ministry, they don't go by themselves. You go in pairs. You have an elder with you, or somebody to whom you are accountable, who is your support, who is your prayer partner, who helps you to be able to deliver your ministry in a faithful way. We were taught by renewed experience to labor for an inward stillness, at no time to seek for words, but to live in the spirit of truth, and utter that to people which truth opened in us. Not what your ego tells you to do, not what you have decided is the best thing to say. We labored in the love of the gospel, according to the measure received, and through the mercies of him who is the strength to the poor who trust in him. So this doesn't sound too much like the progressive wing of the Democratic Party or any other wing of any other party. It was very much a spirit-filled, prayerful endeavor. He describes this true gospel ministry versus the worldly wisdom in this way. From an inward purifying and steadfast abiding under it springs a lively desire for the good of others. Wherever men are true ministers of Jesus Christ, it is from the operation of his Spirit upon their hearts, first purifying them and thus giving them a feeling sense of the condition of others. This truth was early fixed in my mind, and I was taught to watch the pure opening and to take heed lest while I was standing to speak, my own will should get uppermost and cause me to utter words from worldly wisdom and depart from the channel of the true gospel ministry. So he was very conscious of the ever-present danger of having what he felt was his own self supersede what he felt God was telling him to share, when and how and with whom. So he had, as a young man, he went and left home and he went to work for a shopkeeper in Mount Holly, what was then West Jersey. And one day, as part of his employment, his employer came to him and wanted him to write a bill of sale for the sale of a Black woman who was being sold to another friend. And this is the first instance that he has in his journal that he has a moment, he feels uncomfortable doing this, but he does it because it is an employer telling him to do it, and he justified it because the woman was being sold to an elderly friend, and I guess he felt that maybe she was going to be treated kindly there. But he was very uncomfortable with it. And when sometime after that, another friend, a young friend, came and asked him to do a similar thing. His wife had been given a woman, I think it was a man or a woman, as part of an enslavement agreement, perhaps as a marriage gift. And he wanted John Woolman to write an instrument of slavery. And John Woolman said he was not comfortable doing it. I did notice, and this is my assumption, this young man said, well, he wasn't really comfortable either with the idea of slavery, but this was a gift to his wife, so he felt he had to do it. And John Woolman mentions it was a young friend, and I'm thinking, do we have young friends coming along now who are becoming the leading edge of getting Quakers to cease to enslave people? So John Woolman was finding himself thrust by the world into situations where he was increasingly uncomfortable. So he was able, because he was obviously very hardworking and he had a lot of integrity and was trusted, he was able, after a very short time, to be able to buy his own shop and to set up his own business. And at the same time as he was becoming more and more involved with his own work, he was becoming more and more involved with the work of the Quaker meeting, of the yearly meeting, and he was traveling more in the ministry, and he found himself at a crossroads where he had to make the choice. Was he going to become a friend who was going to continue to become prosperous, or was he going to change his life so that he could give himself wholly to lead the spirit-led life? My mind, through the power of truth, was in a good degree weaned from the desire of outward greatness, and I was learning to be content with real conveniences that were not costly, so that a way of life free from such entanglements appeared best for me, though the income was small. I saw that a humble man with the blessing of the Lord might live on a little, and that where the heart was set on greatness, success in business did not satisfy the craving, but that in common with an increase of wealth, the desire for wealth increased. There was a care in my mind to so pass my time as to things outward that nothing might hinder me from the most steady attention to the voice of the true shepherd. So in about, I think it was around about 1746, he had his first journey in the ministry to Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina. And he was already very primed he was troubled by the slave owning that he saw in Pennsylvania amongst friends and in New Jersey. But going down into Maryland and down deeper into the South, he probably saw a lot more there than he was seeing around where he was living. And he found himself just increasingly, his testimony against slavery was really took a big boost. Incidentally, on this trip, he visited Fairfax meeting in Waterford and Hopewell meeting in Winchester. I don't think he visited Goose Creek on this visit. Two things were remarkable to me in this journey. First, when I eat, drank, and lodged free cost with people who lived in ease on the hard labor of their slaves, I felt uneasy. Now, these are Quakers he's staying with, and these are Quakers that are becoming wealthy. And as my mind was inward to the Lord, I found from place to place this uneasiness return upon me at times through the whole visit. Secondly, this trade of importing them from their native country, being much encouraged against them and the white people and their children, so generally without much labor, was frequently the subject of my serious thought. And I saw in these southern provinces so many vices and corruptions increased by this trade and this way of life that it appeared to me as a dark gloominess hanging over the land. And though now many willingly run into it, yet in future the consequence will be grievous to posterity. Several times in his diary, Woolman is quite prophetic about what slavery was going to end up. It was going to end up being very grievous to prosperity in the United States. And he could see that this was going to end badly, unless, I think he hoped it would be over before then, but he could see this was not a good route for this country to be on. But he also saw, and this I think is fascinating, that it wasn't just bad for those people that are enslaved, it was bad for the Quakers. It was bad for their souls. It was bad for everyone. He spoke about at one point in his diary, in some places our way was difficult. And this is where he was talking, this was actually in a later journey. well, not everybody was receptive to his message. I often saw the necessity of keeping down to that root from whence our concern proceeded, and have cause in reverent thankfulness humbly to bow down before the Lord, who was near to me, and preserved my mind in calmness under some sharp conflicts, and begat a spirit of sympathy and tenderness in me towards some who were grievously entangled in the spirit of this world. So even in situations where his message was not being very kindly received or was being rejected, he found by turning inwards through prayer, through understanding that his inspiration comes from God, that he was able to remain calm, and that he began to have a spirit of sympathy towards those who, he said, were grievously entangled in the spirit of this world. So his sympathy was, in his interactions with slaveholders, I think that sympathy was often in his diary. It shows his journal that it was received and understood by those who were still reluctant to manumit their slaves or change the way in which they conducted their lives and their business. And at this time too, during these years, he was also, of course, talking to people in his meeting. He was appearing at yearly meetings. He was working and working and working to put forward the idea that Quakers could not own slaves and remain faithful to their calling as Quakers. And it was really hard. It was hard. And he was not a man, I think, who was comfortable in situations of conflict. It was not his nature. But, he saw himself like the prophet Jeremiah. The messages of the prophet Jeremiah were so disagreeable to the people and so reverse to the spirit they lived in, that he became the prophet of their reproach, and in the weakness of nature thought to desist from his prophetic office. I wonder how often John Woolman thought, this is too hard. I saw at this time that if I was honest to declare that which truth opened in me, I could not please all men, and labored to be content in the way of my duty, however disagreeable to my own inclination. Interestingly, in spite of the fact that he seemed to, it wasn't that he was not getting nowhere, but it was so slow. The whole time that he was busy talking out against slavery within the Society of Friends, there was slowly more and more people who were coming forth to his point of view. Minutes were written. Small steps were made, as we saw in 1758. Philadelphia yearly meeting, they issued a minute saying, okay, you can't be involved in the business of meeting if you're going to trade in slaves. So it was baby steps, but there was progress, but it must have been very difficult. But John Woolman, interestingly, always trusted in Quaker process. And he, even in situations where he would go to a yearly meeting knowing that the minute or a letter or anything that he prepared was probably not going to be adopted, he still went and worked within the Quaker process system. Except our minds are rightly prepared and we clearly understand the case we speak to, instead of forwarding, we hinder business and make more labor for those on whom the burden of the work is laid. If selfish views or a partial spirit have any room in our minds, we are unfit for the Lord's work. So this too, I think he saw as a check to getting ahead of his guide, of him. He was very careful to stay within Quaker process and believed in it. He trusted that eventually it would bear fruit. And he saw part of that bowing, I suppose, or at least staying within Quaker process as a measure of the humility that's needed to, in fact, do God's work in the world. I find that to be a fool as to worldly wisdom and commit my cause to God, not fearing to offend men who take offense at the simplicity of truth, is the only way to remain unmoved at the sentiments of others. Deep humility is a strong bulwark, and as we enter into it, we find safety and true exaltation. The foolishness of God is wiser than man, and the weakness of God is stronger than man. Being unclothed of our own wisdom and knowing the abasement of the creature, therein we find that power to arise which gives health and vigor to us. He also had faith that under God's guidance, progress would be made, even if it was kind of on God's time. Some of the times when he was most discouraged, he would turn inward to that inward message, to that inward guide. And he said, I felt easy to leave all to him who alone is able to turn the hearts of the mighty and make way for spreading of truth in the earth by means agreeable to his infinite wisdom. Through the goodness of the Lord, truth, I believe, gained some ground. And it was a strengthening opportunity to be honest-hearted. So, you know, the life of integrity that Woolman left, it could be seen in all kinds of ways. He worked for peace. I just wanted to include just a couple of little quotes that he had. When he spoke about when he decided he couldn't pay war taxes. This was during the French and Indian War, when property owners were being called upon by the crown to pay taxes that would go towards the British forces that were fighting the French and Indian War. I all along believed that there were some upright, up-hearted men who paid such war taxes, but could not see that their example was sufficient reason for me to do so. Well, I believed the spirit of truth required of me as an individual to suffer patiently the distress of goods rather than to pay actively. He also had to house some soldiers and was told that he'd be paid to do it. And he housed the soldiers, but he refused to take payment. This is another quote that we have that is often used with Woolman, which is so pertinent today. May we look upon our treasure, the furniture of our houses and our garments, and try to discover where the seeds of war have nourishment in these our possessions. But finally, just the last thing was John Woolman's visit to visit the Native Americans that were on the right on the frontier of the settlement, and where there was a lot of violence going on. And he was led to go and visit a group of Indians who were actually converts at the Moravian mission in Wyalusing, Pennsylvania. And this was a great quote that he uses often in his journal. Love was the first motion. He always moved from a place of love. And then a concern arose in me to spend time with the Indians, that I might feel and understand their life and the spirit they live in. If haply I might receive some instruction from them, or they be in any degree helped forward by my following the leadings of truth among them. So near evening I was at the Moravian meeting, where the pure gospel love was felt, to the tendering of some of our hearts. And the interpreters, endeavoring to acquaint people with what I said in short sentences, found some difficulty, as none of them were quite perfect in the English and Delaware tongue. So they helped one another, and we labored along, divine love attending. And afterwards, feeling my mind covered with the spirit of prayer, I told the interpreters that I found it in my heart to pray to God, and believed if I prayed right, he would hear me, and expressed my willingness for them to omit interpreting. So our meeting ended with a degree of divine love. And before the people went out, I observed Papanunahang spoke to one of the interpreters, and I was afterward told that he said in substance as follows: I love to feel where words come from. So that's just kind of where I'm going to leave it. John Woolman is the exemplar of the spirit-led life. He in so many ways is so counter-cultural in terms of how we all go about expressing ourselves on issues that we feel so very, very passionate about, particularly at this time where it's so easy for us to make enemies and find enemies. So I just hope and pray that people will spend time with John Woolman to learn more about how one can live in peace and live that inward life, which does result in transformation, both inner and outer. So thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Patricia, thank you.
Yes, thanks very much. A truly inspired life. Susan and Chuck, either of you feel led to start? No? Susan, thank you.
Well, it's a little difficult to follow John Woolman. So just a little bit of context. As I mentioned, I grew up within a Friends community. My father was, I don't think anybody in this group is old enough to have known him, but he was director of the National Service Board for Religious Objectors during World War II. And he also became director of CARE, the International Food Relief Organization. In fact, my brother and I, we talk about this history a lot to try to remember things, whether we have any clue why it was he was asked, because he had been a journalist also, to go after World War II and close out what became CARE. And he made all these recommendations why it should continue as an ongoing organization. And so I lived in an environment where we sat around the dinner table and we talked about food shortages and starvation and civil rights. And I also grew up in a meeting that was very active. It was very socially active. There were buses that went to Washington for marches, and we sponsored a family, a refugee family. A meeting member offered a house, and I remember being in my bicycle and having toys in it to take to the children. And so it was a very activist group of people. And it was also a community that was very tolerant. At one point, I spoke to this in meeting. We had a very sort of hostile presence at one point in attending the meeting and speaking very racist, bigoted messaging in uniform, Austrian uniform, very pro-neo-Nazi. And my father was asked to elder him. And he would come to our house and they would sit in the yard. And I just remember hearing the debrief, and I was quite young. I was under the age of 10. But it stayed with me, this level of tolerance, and the fact that he was never, Algernon, I can't remember his last name, was never told not to come to meeting. Our meeting that I first grew up in grew, and it was decided that it needed to be divided in two. And so my father had observed this beautiful piece of land on the in a little town I grew up, Yardley, by the way, in Bucks County, where Goose Creek Friends came from, is where I grew up. And my father saw this beautiful piece of land, found out an elder member of the meeting who didn't attend. She was quite old at the time, and approached her about donating the land. And we physically built the meeting. Like literally, we had enough tradespeople in the meeting that we did this, and the kids had, I'm sure they created jobs for us, but it was, we collected stones from the street and then filled the walls. And my brother's still a member of the whole meeting. My mother was a Northern Baptist, and she became a member of the Friends meeting because she thought worshiping together as a family was important. And there was never a discussion on, first day Sunday morning, whether we would go to meeting. If my father was in the country, we went to meeting. I don't have any recollection of what we did when he wasn't there. So this was the environment I grew up with. I don't really remember like being instructed to do things or to feel certain ways, or like being told specifically, you know, this is what we as friends believe. But obviously it permeated me because I have some very early memories as a child, to which I'll share with you. From the earliest time I can remember, I was very preoccupied with civil rights and social issues. We had a woman, Ann Payton, who came to do like ironing and cleaning once a week. And she lived across the river in Trenton, New Jersey. And she invited my family and another white family that she worked for to come to her apartment for dinner. And this was in the 50s. So I look back now and think some of this was terrible, but putting it in context of the 50s. So we go there and the food is prepared and we're told to start eating, but she's not sitting. It's the white folks, they're sitting around the table. And I still remember that feeling of discomfort. And I've asked my brother about this. He said I didn't make it up. Leaned over to my father and said, when is Ann going to sit down with us? And I remember him going, shh. So I thought, you know, looking back, it's like on the one hand, I saw him such a visionary, but yet it still wasn't far enough. There was another incident that occurred a few doors down. There was a cross burned on a new neighbor's yard. And I asked my brother recently, I'm like, I remember being told at the dinner table by my father that this had happened. And it was so disturbing to me that we never had this family come to our house. And he said, well, you'll feel a little better to know that I went to the town council with Daddy to ask what could be done about what had happened on the street. I remember being, during the years of the air raid drills, my father was a conscientious objector, as were two of my brothers. And I was never told this, but somehow I had this within me from either what I'd heard or what I had, you know, gleaned. And I remember climbing under my little wood desk at one point during an air raid drill. And then the next time we had it, I'm like, I'm a Quaker. We don't prepare for war. And I refused to climb under my little wood desk. And I must have been 8 years old. And I had not been told to do that. I was never told that this is what but I felt it. I just felt it. And so I was not, you know, harshly taken to the office. And, you know, I explained to the principal, the elementary school principal, my principals. And he said, that's fine. He said, I'll tell you what, in the future, when we have one of these, you know, Susan, why don't you just come down here and we'll have a nice conversation. But this was under the age of 10. And so after my father's death, I had a sense that my life had been a waste. And my mother, who was not ever an activist, said, well, dear, you are only 11 years old. And I think there will be some opportunities for you. And within literally 2 weeks, this family in the meeting, the mother and the family was critically ill and they couldn't afford to have 2 nurses come in. And so she asked if I would help. And I said, yes, I would do that. And then in my teenage years, I became very involved in a number of community projects within the nearby Black communities, starting projects with a high school and working programs and so forth. How I ended up a lawyer was somewhat mysterious. It was never on my radar screen whatsoever. I got married when I was young. We had one car and he was in law school at nights. So I started sitting in a night class and there was this professor, Banzaf, who was Ralph Nader protege. And they would get groups together like to sue for air pollution and landlord tenant. And I'm like, wow, this is something I could do. So that would be fun. And when I had my law school admission interview, I was 6.5 months very clearly pregnant. William and Mary Law School, and I figured there was absolutely no chance that they would take a pregnant woman into law school who, when they asked, what is your purpose in going to law school? And I said, I want to bring about social justice. And then as I was walking out of the interview, the secretary was giving me a referral for a pediatrician. And I'm like, wow. So I think one thing that I've learned in the course of this is there's just opportunities everywhere. And, you know, I just have this sense, and I've always thought I don't know if something's wrong with me, but I have these moments where I just know I have to act and do something. I know it comes from a very deep place. I just feel this, like, you know, adrenaline and almost a sweat coming on, and I'm like, I have to do this. This is something that it may not be successful, but it needs to be spoken to. You know, cases when I was a civil rights prosecutor at the Justice Department that no one wanted to touch, but I just felt compelled to bring some cases. One that involved the victim class were homeless African-American men who lived on the streets in Southeast the United States, mostly Miami. And I just spent weekend after weekend wandering the streets with a young street minister, finding people who'd been victimized. And everyone told me I would never make the case. No one's going to fault you for closing the case. But I just felt this need to do it. You know, I felt like this is a group of people who are beyond being marginalized, are like, don't exist. You know, they just don't exist. And, you know, the only way I can explain this deep sense of purpose, I guess, is really those early years, the sense of, you know, that we each have a purpose. We have to figure out what that is. We each have a purpose. And also, I think my father being the instrument that, you know, you can say there's power in one person, and it's true. I mean, one person can do a lot if he or she, you know, chooses to. I mean, just because you bring so many more people on board in the process of it. And I think, you know, there's more I could share, but it's late in the evening. I'm not sure if this is actually addressing, Patricia, what you hoped I would address or not, but I will.
It's fine. So this is great, Susan. Thank you.
I will yield to Chuck, and if anybody has any questions or wants to connect at any other time, I'm nearby.
Very good. Thank you, Susan. And as I said in the opening, I was an Episcopalian for not as long as Simon, but about 60 years. And anyway, I came to a meeting, and when Patricia sent the email asking Susan and I to talk, the person who came to my mind, who was very influential to me in my early years as a Quaker, as well as right now, and that was Thomas Kelly. And so I'm going to move us up 180 years from where Patricia was to where Thomas Kelly is. And Thomas Kelly, the book that I still have, A Testament of Devotion, is an outstanding book. And the thing about Thomas Kelly was he was very influential in his years. And you have to remember that he died as a fairly young man. He was 48, I think, when he passed away. And people such as Richard Rohr, other heavy theologians, even the Pope has acknowledged Thomas Kelly. And I was moved by him. And so in his book, he has this opening. It says, deep within us all, there is an amazing intersanctuary of the soul, amazing intersanctuary of the soul, a holy place, a divine center, a speaking voice to which we continuously return. Eternity is in our hearts, pressing upon our time-torn lives, warming us with the intimacy of the astonishing calling home unto itself. Yielding to these persuasions, gladly committing ourselves in body and soul, utterly and completely to the light within, is the beginning of a true life. And so, these are pretty heavy words, and they sat dormant in my subconscious for years, and I'm a great believer in the subconscious. These little wheels are turning all the time. And then I finally realized that if I was to move from my heart to the action, I had to get out of my circle of comfort. Each of us, each person on the screen, each person has a circle of comfort. And that's where we sit around, we have our beer, we have our coffee, we have whatever. But it's hard to break out of that circle of comfort. But to do that, it's not easy, but if you want to move from your heart to action, guess what? You have to take risk. Betty and I, a zillion years ago, we would go to anti-war protest on the mall, go back to her parents' house and be scolded by her father and all this craziness. And it was good, but we did it because we had friends and it was a community that was doing this. And as years went by, I knew I had to get out of my cocoon. And here's some of the things that we did. And Sheila did some of them and so forth. I remember one time a group of us from Meeting went to Dulles Airport to greet these immigrants. We had signs welcoming these immigrants. They got through customs and they looked at us and, oh my goodness, what's going on here? And then I don't know if you remember, but in 2017, the day after a certain person was inaugurated, there was the March on Washington. Okay, the Women's March on Washington. And I know that woman loved the Quaker process, but I'm not a good process person. So instead of going to the Quakers about getting a bus, I sat at the dining room table for hours, hiring 2 commercial buses that took people down to the mall. And the growth that you get from being uncomfortable and doing what you think is right. A year later, after the murder of 17 students and teachers in Florida, guess what? Back to the dining room table, getting another bus, working with the Presbyterian at St. Andrews, I believe it was, because the schools wouldn't let people park there to take buses. So all of these negotiations, and that was, again, to stop gun violence and how we picked our words. a little later after that, Betty, my lovely wife, developed breast cancer. Okay. And guess what? It's time to get out of one's circle of comfort. And Sheila, I don't know if you remember, but I called you and 5 other people who were giving care, who were caregivers to their spouses. And we started a group of caregivers where we would sit down from time to time. It was a short number of times. Hey, what's working for you? You got our back. Not a comfortable thing to do. And you know, my wife is the only one left out of that group. Breaks your heart. And the giving of gun laws. Here again, Sheila and I are on the working with that, and developing that within you and getting it out. It doesn't take a lot of work, folks. Making someone smile. I remember once coming out of the 7-Eleven with a cup of coffee, and I see this guy in the truck, and it says, "Remove animal manure." I said, "Oh, I can have fun with this." So I went up to him and I said, "You know, I have 2 horses." And he looked at me, no. And we just roared. And the person in the food line and so forth. Betty works at this food kitchen down the road here in Lovettsville. Serves 90-some people. And to talk to these people and put a smile on their face is really important. And I'm just going to close. I have no idea what time it is. Oh, we got some time. Following that small voice within each of us that both Woolman and Thomas Kelly talk about is very important. And so I, at the age of 74, by the way, which was a number of years ago, I decided to peel back the onion and find out, is all this that I learned in all the years in church, is it true? And I spent months at the computer. I got blood clots. From doing my research. And I looked at everything from the Roman Catholic practice of crucifixion to the Greco-Roman contribution to Christianity, the Big Bang, which is fascinating, and it has been a great source of my spiritual being. The Apostle Paul's impact on the early church. The James Webb Telescope, now that's fascinating. And looking at that, anti-Semitism, the second coming of Christ, looking at all of these things from doing your own research and not taking that which other people want you to believe as truth is so powerful. And I think it's within the words and the spirit of both what John Woolman was professing and as well as Thomas Kelly. Thank you, Thomas Kelly.
Thank you, Chuck Hedges. Wow. Well, I've certainly been inspired to do some more reflecting and seeking of the voice within and all these voices. I'm very thankful to hear. We have time for some comments, and I'm game to stay after 8:30 if others haven't had a chance to share yet. But does anyone have a leading that they'd like to share with us now? Joel, Mr. Huff, no rush. Can you? Okay. Yep. Will do, Joel. Anyone have a leading to share further?
I like what Chuck said about getting out of your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably I have always had comfort in getting out of my comfort zone, and I'm grateful for that. And I attribute that to the home meeting where people like weren't afraid of, you know, failure or lack of success. It was important sometimes just to speak the truth and to enter new areas of challenge and you know, and I think and that connected to listening to your voice is really pretty important and been, you know, critical in my own life, even though sometimes it's very painful. It's very painful and it doesn't always go well.
I know that feeling. Thank you. Yeah. Other sharing?
The integrity of Mr. Woolman that Patricia describes is surely what I want.
Yes. Hits home for me too. Yes.
You know, one of the things sometimes I've heard people say about, particularly about liberal unprogrammed Quakers, oh, well, you can believe anything you want. And I say, no, you can't, that's not true. And I can't even unpack that phrase. So what I generally say, if people say that to me, I said, well, the thing about Quakerism is you might go into it thinking this is going to be easy, but it is a really, really challenging spiritual path. It is incredibly challenging. And because you are called upon to live out of an authentic spiritual center, the center that Thomas Kelly wrote about. And as soon as you try and outsource that to somebody else, whether it's a priest or a minister or a pastor or a doctrine, and I'm not saying those things are not valuable, because I know that there are many people in those religious communities who do in fact live from their center and do fantastic things and live challenging paths. But for me, it was this terrible moment of recognition that this is all on me. You know, I'm going to stick with this, and I'm going to live with this, and I'm going to try and live with this and put this into practice, or I'm not going to be able to stick with it. I would have gone years ago. So it is very challenging. And I'm just amazed by the number of extraordinary people that I have met in my Quaker travels. You know, you'll see some little old lady sitting in a corner, not saying very much. And then somebody will say, do you know who that is? And I'll say, no. Oh, well, that's Marjorie Nelson. She was captured by the North Vietnamese and held in the jungle for 2 years. I mean, it's like, you know, and, you know, or somebody else is, you know, has done this. Or you'll just start chatting casually to somebody, and they'll start talking about, you know, things that they've been doing or done. Or I recently discovered a woman by the name of Marjorie Sykes who went off to India and spent 30, 40 years as a sort of peace person, Quaker in India. I mean, it was just extraordinary. So there are the famous, the infamous, and the not known, well known at all. And they're around us, you know, sitting there in silence sometimes. It's like, this is power. This is power.
Yeah.
Will you tell them about your T-shirts you had on Facebook, Patricia? I mean, we are a peculiar people, and you know, it sounds funny, but your t-shirt actually, I mean, we are set apart.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I had a photograph on Facebook showing off a pair of mitts that I'd knitted, and I was wearing my naked Quaker t-shirt, which had and I could pick it up and show it to you. It had sort of some silhouettes of a couple of naked Quakers, one wearing a bonnet and one wearing a hat and holding up a pitchfork, and then it was, clothe yourself in righteousness. And that's it. It was a t-shirt that was created by a group of young friends who called themselves the Naked Quakers, about probably 10, 15 years ago. So yeah. There's nothing to hide behind if you're a Quaker. Absolutely nothing to hide behind.
Yep. That's what friends are for. Any other leadings to share?
Well, I would like to say that I was reading in Quaker, the Quakers, what was it? The little flyer that comes around, Quaker, can't think of what it is. It's a newsletter that comes around every week. And anyway, it was saying that if we wanted to combat racism in the present day, that what that would look like is if we would take on more of life, addressing it without our machines, if we would do more walking where we need to go, if we would make our clothing, if we would cook our own meals and use the most simple process possible to do even that, the closer we can get to actually using our energies to produce what we need and what those around us need, that would put us more in touch with others who are doing the same, who tend to be poor and very likely of a different color than we are. And that this would be the fastest route to getting rid of racism. The question asked in the article was, if you take we have the concept that we are all a part of the same cloth, right? We're in one little tiny piece of the racist society that we live in. So we're all responsible for that to some degree. Now, if you take it the opposite of that, what would it look like if we were in a non-racist or an anti-racist society? What would that look like? And the answer to that question, according to what I was reading, was to do more of the actual work that's required to meet our needs, not relying on an automobile so much, not relying on a vacuum cleaner, for instance, or a lawnmower to cut our grass. Doing more hands-on work to get our needs met, that this puts us in touch with others who are doing the same. And I've experienced that as being a very true reality, that as soon as you get off that high mechanization, fast society that we live in, where we think we're all so powerful because we can do all this, it really socks it home to you just how little you can actually do. And you look to your left and you look to your right, and it's somebody poor with a different color skin who's standing next to you. And you're having the same experience, and you're in the same conversation, and you're saying the same things. And I think there's wealth in that.
Yes. Thank you, Jolene. I agree with you. Yeah. Thank you. Other leadings to share?
Yeah, I
Yes,
got one.
Sean.
You know, um, I think the thing I love about Quakerism the most is hearing other people talk. It's something about the meeting for worship that I appreciate when they're out of the silence, somebody shares something, thoughtful, and often something that's part of their story. And what I've loved about these classes too is hearing people share their stories. And I just sat with Susan in first day of school this past week, and the first thing I was thinking is I would love to hear more about her story. And lo and behold, she's speaking tonight, and also to hear from Chuck, because it makes everything just kind of relatable for me. And for me, that's the thing about John Woolman. And I've read half of his journal. I've been slow reading it for several years, and I just am savoring it. I don't want to rush through it. I'll read a few pages and find myself kind of reflecting. So much of what he gets into is just kind of common experience for me, the doubt, the uncertainty. Did I talk too much? Did I push too hard? Did I push not hard enough? And he's a singular person in what he was able to do and what courage he had, something I don't feel I come even remotely close to. But at the same time, there's a part of him that's feels almost exactly like me. So I find just bringing these big ideas or even these big spiritual concepts or these leadings that we feel and bringing it down to the place where it sounds like, it feels like I can do it is always extremely helpful.
Patricia, I just have to say this. So when my father died, he was an avid reader and he had like 5,000 books. And a lot of them were really, really old books. And a lot of them were Quaker books, including the Journal of John Woolman. He had several copies. I think I've pretty much donated all of those either to my home friends meeting, Sidwell Friends, some of the private friend schools, but he had a massive collection of them. So I no longer have it. But it was just sort of funny how many copies he had. And I collected them all. I just intuitively knew my mother wouldn't value them. And so I put them in boxes and said they're mine and had them for quite a few years until I decided they needed to be in a safer location than my house.
Very positive. Wow.
I went and got my naked Quaker t-shirt.
Oh, look.
It says on the front there, clothe yourself in righteousness.
Very cool. I like it.
Now we're going to have a first day lesson this Sunday on the 3rd chapter of Genesis when sin comes into the whole situation, and in the 2nd chapter the man and the woman were naked. I was thinking about, and of course they were in the 3rd chapter too. They had to put the fig leaves over and all that.
Right.
I was thinking about doing a puppet thing with them, and I'm wondering how I'm going to get with this naked thing. How it's going to go over, I don't know. We'll just deal with it when it comes, I reckon.
The young audience, you need multimedia for sure. The more puppets and things we can do, the better. Other sharings people have. And the 9th, 9th Quaker Value will be October 25th, the last Wednesday of October. Plus, we plan to have a November summary session to try and highlight all the sharings and give folks more time. So if you have more reflections over the next month, please make note if you're like me, or hold them in your mind if you've got an excellent memory, and we'll look forward to sharing it all again when we get together in October. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, can I make a plug? There's the
Yeah.
John Watts that did the Quaker Speak now does
The Quaker.
The Quaker podcast. It's excellent.
Okay. Yeah.
It is. Okay, and our last belief, which we're going to be discussing next month, is modeling God's presence in our lives is more important than espousing beliefs. So this is going to be, I think we'll do, I'm not going to be doing any kind of introduction or stuff. You'll probably be relieved to hear. I think we're going to do a lot of sharing about ourselves. And so I'm looking forward to it, because I think it's a great way to end us of our nine beliefs or core beliefs that our friend Art Larrabee came up with.
Blessing for that. Yeah. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, so we'll close in silence and leave as you feel led. And bless everyone for being here and joining us and participating. Thank you.